Now, what do you see as the difference between vision, philosophy, and style in expressing leadership? Vision, philosophy, and style.
Well, my style is sort of, I guess, based on my vision and philosophy. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
when I assumed the pastor of a church, nobody ever heard me make a criticism of my predecessors. When I came to the NAACP, you'll never read anywhere where I had any criticism of anything that Roy Wilkins did or said. In my mind, perhaps I did have some thoughts, but it's not my style
Mm-hmm.
to be critical. It bothers me when somebody uh, takes a position and starts immediately tearing down everything else somebody has done. Unless the structure is crooked or bad, why try to destroy it? And that has been my style, and I suppose that's based on my philosophy. When I came to the NAACP, there were those who warned me that the people who were there were all Roy Wilkins, devotees or
Mm-hmm.
clones, loved him, and they'd never work with me, or if I can use a worse word, never work for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Right.
little shade of difference there. And so I was advised that my best bet would be to clean house.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked with many college presidents who brag on the fact when I came here there were 15 deans. In 3 years I had hired 13 new deans. And that when I went to the NAACP, I didn't move anybody, from the position they had. I worked with them. Later on I made some adjustments. But I made it my business to try to work with the people who were there because I thought when I got there the institution had existed long before I got there. It had done without Ben Hooks from 1909 to 1977, so obviously I was not indispensable because they
Now,
never knew me. So I tried to work with people, and I think that's my style, and I suppose that is also a philosophy. Try to use what you have until you find out how it fits.
now, did you apply this style in other instances, the FCC and the pastorate of these two churches, and in the Mahalia Jackson chicken franchise? Does this apply in all cases? Is it
I
adjustable?
think I found that style to be applicable in my church when I went
Mm-hmm.
there. I didn't move anybody at first. Now, that doesn't mean that down the line you don't find there are people who will simply resist your philosophy and not work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to act. You just can't keep, and in my church, there were one or two instances where I had to say, we just can't make it, and it'd be better for one of us to leave. And since I plan to stay, you, you have to leave. But I didn't do that the first day. I tried to work it out. NAACP, as I recall it, the people who were there, I kept as many of them as I could. If they left for on their own
Mm-hmm.
for reasons other than me trying to send them away. Clarence Mitchell was there. I regret it sincerely when he had to leave. Mildred Roxburgh stayed with me and did an excellent job throughout her tenure there. All the people who were there, I tried to work with them. And it has been true at the FCC. I brought one new person in, and my two principal assistants were folk who were there. And we had a glorious time at the FCC. It made so many changes. I could take the next 3 hours and tell you some of the things we were able to do there. I also discovered that you can get help out of people you never looked for. At the FCC, there were 7 commissioners, and we did so much in the realm of EEOC. Remember, when I went to the FCC, there were about 9,000 radio stations, only 13 owned by blacks. Not a single television station owned by blacks. If you had gone across the country, you see very few anchor people, newsrooms, very few camera people. It was just non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought about a wholesale change. And the FCC itself, we had 225 lawyers, only 3 black. Before I left there, we'd had 65. But I discovered that I could do better working with the commissioners, and every decision that had to do with EEOC was 7-0, every decision. That meant sometimes I had to compromise. We instituted broadcast rules in which we looked at each station individually as to what they were doing with minorities and women if they had more than 10 employees. There were many of my black colleagues out in the field who wanted me to get it down to 5. I saw if I went for 5 employees, I'd be in deep trouble. Most of the commission wanted 25. So I had to go with 10. You have to make certain strategic compromises, but it's more important to have a unanimous commission behind me. In a day of budget cuts, we set up a several $million budget just for EEOC enforcement and hired some 15 people and never cut it. Kept going up. I discovered that you can work with people sometimes better. I also found...
Now, where'd that come from? When do you first discover that if I want to get something done, I've got to go to Joe and Frank and Bill and Bob? I mean, as long ago as grade school and high school? Or
I
when?
think so, but I also had another unusual experience in my early legal career in a strictly segregated society. I practiced law before I went on the bench, some 15 years. Circuit court judges, our general sessions, chancery court, criminal court. And it was one of the most amazing things in my life. I never, ever had a decision rendered in court against me that I thought was based on race. Not one time. And I look back on it with amazement, So I discovered that day by day. It was very different in the federal court. The one federal court judge kicked us unmercifully. But in the state courts, men were of a different caliber. And later on, I became their colleague. I went on picnics and brunches and eating dinner in their homes. And I discovered a void of people who really didn't know they wanted to know some black folk. Didn't know that. I'm sure you've had that experience.
Yes.
They didn't consciously recognize it. But when Julian came and they had to deal with it, they said, well, how can we, make this thing work? So I guess it was an evolving process, with me. Then I was in the Masons, I was in the Elks, and I remember one day in the Masonic organization, I wanted to be the master of my lodge, and my lodge didn't meet very often. My Grand Master helped me to get a dispensation so I could be elected. And I remember calling individually 18 men to come to the meeting. Mm-hmm. They all came. And I sat down with them and said, I'd like to be master. Does anybody else want it? Nobody else wanted the position but me. I said, well, will you elect me? They said, yes. I said, well, I'm chairing Dr. Walker's campaign for the school board, and I've got a very important speech to make. And I'm going to rush out and make the speech and come back. And I did. When I came back, they elected somebody else. That taught me a great lesson. Mm. When I walked in, feeling big, and I'd made my great speech, and I'm the campaign manager. And when I started shaking hands, nobody looked at me. They looked off, And finally, I said, well, what happened? And I discovered that somebody else had been elected and was elected by 1 or 2 votes. So I discovered early on that while you have to depend on people, I saw it on the back of a cab here. You may trust the dealer, but cut the cards. Cab, I know you've seen it.
Yes, they have little sayings on the back.
Little saying on the back.
Yeah.
Trust the dealer, but cut the cards. So I learned also that you can take your philosophy too far. You can be too trusting. You have to watch. I don't mean to say that I want to be naive and suggest that people should just believe that folk will do what they say, but you work at it. You attempt to set up and find out what is it that John wants. Can it be done? What is it Mary's looking for? Can it be done? In my law career, so many people came to me for divorce, and I talked them back into marriage, and many of them are still together. So that it's a matter of a philosophy of trying not to be confrontational if you don't have to be. And then I had this other experience. There was a fellow in Tennessee called John Hooker, who ran for governor and for senator, one of the most brilliant men I knew, great lawyer. And somehow when he lost the Senate and the governorship, he felt it was because he didn't have enough business experience. So he started a company called Minnie Pearl Chicken System. Did very well, became a multi-millionaire. Came to Russell Sugarman, who's a friend of mine, A.W. Willis and myself, asked us if we wanted to have some, because we had supported them politically, if we wanted to have some franchise at Minnie Pearl. And we didn't think a Minnie Pearl Chicken System would go very well in the ghetto. So we decided we'd like to have our own system, and he financed us. He owned 50%, we owned 50%. one of the early minority ventures. And I went to Mahalia Jackson, and she agreed to lend her name. We gave her stock in the company. Well, Julian, during the 2 or 3 years I worked with John Hooker, I was exposed to more of the business world and how things were really done. It is almost criminal how black people have been kept out of the business life of America, how little we know about how things are really done. We were sitting out in another room and I would sit there, and John Hooker was the kind of fellow who would let A.W. and I sit right in the room while he was cutting multi-million-dollar deals. We didn't interfere, but we listened, and we'd go out and discuss it and then go back and ask him about it. So I had a chance to learn the art of compromise, why you do certain things certain ways at a very young age as a lawyer. And I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I was exposed to things that most young blacks are not exposed to because I had a chance to be with this man who he became a spectacular failure. Mm-hmm. But before he went down, he became overnight worth over $70 million back in the late 60s when that was a whole lot of money. When his empire collapsed, I collapsed with him. But the knowledge I'd gained, I still had.